You don't need more money. I know that sounds upside down because your mind has probably been telling you the exact opposite. If I just had another $1,000, if I could finally land that promotion, if one lucky break would come my way, then I'd relax. But that's backwards. Money has become the thing you're chasing, when all along it has been chasing the person you refuse to become. I've watched people grind themselves into the ground believing the next paycheck was gonna fix everything. They hustle harder, stress harder, worry harder, and somehow they end up carrying the same feeling they had before they earned more. The numbers changed, but the person looking at those numbers didn't. That's the part almost nobody talks about. Here's the deal. If you wake up every morning assuming you're barely getting by, you'll find proof of it everywhere. A bill pops up, an unexpected expense hits. Somebody tells you the economy is a mess. Your mind goes, "See, I knew it." That old assumption keeps getting fed because you're expecting life to confirm it. And life has a funny way of echoing whatever you quietly believe about yourself. I'm asking you to stop giving all your attention to the bank account for just a moment. I'm not saying ignore your responsibilities. Pay your bills. Show up for your work. Be wise. But don't let those numbers decide who you are. The bank account is a snapshot. It isn't your identity. Think about it this way. Have you ever met someone who wasn't the richest person in the room, yet they carried themselves with this calm confidence? They weren't trying to impress anybody. They weren't freaking out over every little thing. They had this quiet certainty that somehow everything always worked out. You could feel it before they even said a word. That's not luck. That's an assumption made visible. Now maybe you're thinking, yeah, but my situation is different. I hear that all the time. Your mind wants to argue because it's been collecting evidence for years. It says, look at my debt, look at my paycheck, look at what's happened before. I get it, but let me ask you something. Has repeating those facts changed them? Has worrying ever surprised you with abundance? Not once. The world doesn't ask what you wish for. It responds to what you consistently accept as true. That's why two people can face the same circumstances and walk away with completely different results. One expects doors to open, the other expects them to slam shut. Before long, each one finds exactly what they anticipated. So quit giving your energy to the story that says you're always behind. That's old news. You don't have to keep replaying it. Every time that familiar thought shows up telling you that you never have enough, don't wrestle with it. Don't panic. Just recognize it for what it is, an old recording that's been playing way too long. Instead, begin entertaining a different idea. What if you were already the kind of person who never doubted their supply? What if peace, not panic, became your normal? Sit with that for a minute. Let your shoulders relax. Let your breathing slow down. Imagine handling your finances without that knot in your stomach. Imagine opening your banking app with confidence instead of dread. It may feel unfamiliar at first, and that's okay. New assumptions usually do. You don't become wealthy because money finally shows up. Money begins showing up because you've stopped identifying yourself as someone who is lacking. That's the shift. It's subtle, but it's everything. The moment you no longer need the outer world to convince you that abundance is possible, you've already stepped into a new state. And once that state becomes natural, life has a remarkable way of catching up. It may not happen overnight, but it begins the instant you stop saying, "I'll believe it when I see it," and start living as though the answer is already finding its way to you. That's when the weight starts to lift. That's when relief begins. Most people think their financial life is being written by what happens around them. They believe the paycheck decides how they feel. They believe the economy decides whether they can relax. They believe an opportunity has to arrive before confidence can appear. That's how almost everyone has been taught to think. And because of that, they spend years reacting instead of creating. But pause for a moment and notice something. Before you look at your bank account, you've already had a conversation with yourself. Before you pay a bill, you've already formed an opinion about whether you're someone who always struggles or someone who always finds a way. Before a single dollar moves in or out of your life, your inner world has already spoken. That conversation matters more than most people realize. Maybe you wake up and think, here we go again. I hope nothing unexpected shows up today. It feels harmless. It even sounds practical. Yet that quiet sentence carries an assumption. It assumes life is about to become difficult. It prepares your mind to search for evidence that something is wrong. And guess what? Your mind is incredibly good at proving itself right. You'll notice every expense, every delay, Every inconvenience, every email that doesn't arrive, every opportunity that slips by. Pretty soon you're saying, see, I knew this would happen. But did life really surprise you? Or did your attention simply collect evidence for what you were already expecting? That's the question worth asking. Think about two people walking into the exact same situation. One believes things usually work out. The other expects disappointment. They hear the same conversation, see the same opportunities, meet the same people, yet they leave with completely different experiences. Why? Because expectation quietly filters reality. Your assumptions influence what you notice, how you respond, the confidence in your voice, the risks you're willing to take, and even the opportunities you recognize. It's almost like wearing invisible glasses. Whatever those lenses are focused on becomes your world. If you've spent years assuming money is hard to earn, you'll naturally overlook possibilities that don't fit that belief. If you've accepted the story that wealthy people are just lucky, your mind stops looking for ways you can succeed. Without realizing it, you become loyal to an old identity. Here's what's wild. Most people never question that identity. They question the economy. They question their boss. They question the market. They question their timing. But they rarely question the assumptions running quietly in the background every single day. Listen to your own inner dialogue sometime. Don't judge it, just observe it. When you see someone successful, what do you immediately think? When an unexpected bill arrives, what story do you tell yourself? When you imagine your future, does your mind paint a picture of freedom or another year of barely getting by? Those answers reveal far more than your current bank balance ever could. Now, I'm not asking you to pretend problems don't exist. If a payment is due, pay it. If work needs to be done, do the work. Practical action still matters. The difference is the emotional state from which you take that action. One person pays a bill while secretly thinking, I'm always falling behind. Another pays the exact same bill thinking, money flows through my life, and there's always more on the way. Outwardly, they're doing the same thing. Inwardly, they're planting completely different seeds. Life tends to grow whatever is planted consistently. That's why changing your financial life begins with changing the conversation you keep having when nobody else is around. Catch yourself when you automatically say, I can't afford that. Instead, ask, how would someone who expects abundance think about this? Notice the shift. One statement closes every door before it opens. The other invites your mind to explore possibilities. This isn't about forcing fake positivity or walking around pretending everything is perfect. People can usually sense when they're trying too hard. Real change feels quieter than that. It's choosing, again and again, to return to the assumption that life supports you instead of fights you. Some days your old habits will come back. That's okay. You'll hear the familiar voice saying nothing ever changes. Don't argue with it. Don't wrestle with it. Simply recognize it as yesterday's programming trying to replay itself. Then gently replace it. Tell yourself, my circumstances are catching up with the person I'm becoming. Repeat that often enough, not with strain but with calm confidence, and something begins to soften inside you. Fear loses its grip. Urgency fades. You stop checking the outer world every 5 minutes for proof. Instead, you begin living from a deeper certainty. And when that certainty becomes natural, your actions change without effort. Your decisions become clearer. You notice opportunities you would have ignored before. Conversations unfold differently. Doors begin opening in ways you couldn't have planned. From the outside, people call it luck. From the inside, it feels like life finally reflecting the story you've been telling yourself all along. Here's one of the biggest mistakes people make when they're trying to improve their financial life. They spend almost every waking hour trying to rearrange the outside world while leaving the inside exactly the same. They polish their resume. They send out more applications. They scroll through business ideas. They watch another video, buy another course, and hunt for the next strategy. None of those things are wrong. Taking action has its place. Building skills has value. Learning is worthwhile. The problem begins when every action is driven by fear instead of confidence. Fear has a way of disguising itself as productivity. Someone can stay busy all day and still be operating from the belief that nothing will ever work out. Take a second and think about that. Two people can make the exact same phone call. They can send the same email. They can interview for the same position. Outwardly, they appear to be doing identical things. Yet one person quietly expects rejection before the conversation even begins, while the other carries the calm expectation that something good is unfolding. The actions may look the same, The state behind those actions couldn't be more different. That's why changing your circumstances starts with changing yourself. Most people have it backward. They tell themselves, once I get the promotion, then I'll feel successful. Or, once my bank account reaches a certain number, then I'll finally relax. But that way of thinking creates an endless cycle. The promotion arrives, and suddenly there's a new target. The raise comes, and now it's not enough. The debt shrinks, but a fresh worry takes its place. There's always another mountain, because the person climbing it never changed. If you carry the identity of someone who is constantly lacking, you'll eventually find new reasons to feel that lack, even after your circumstances improve. That's why you've probably met people who earn impressive incomes yet live in constant stress. They worry about losing everything. They compare themselves with everyone around them. They never feel like it's enough. At the same time, you've likely met someone with far less who walks through life with remarkable peace. The difference isn't just the amount of money. It's the identity each person has accepted. Here's something worth noticing. When people feel afraid financially, they often start forcing life. They chase every opportunity because they're terrified of missing out. They say yes to things they don't even believe in. They overwork. They overthink. They check their accounts over and over, hoping something magically changes between breakfast and lunch. Sound familiar? It's exhausting. And here's the crazy part. That frantic energy rarely produces clear decisions. Fear narrows your vision. Confidence expands it. When you're operating from panic, every choice feels urgent. When you're operating from trust, you're able to recognize which opportunities actually fit your direction. That doesn't mean you stop working. It means your work comes from clarity instead of desperation. Imagine planting a seed in a garden. Would you dig it up every morning just to see if it had started growing? Of course not. You'd understand that growth happens beneath the surface before it becomes visible. Yet that's exactly what many people do with their goals. They make one positive decision, then spend the next week wondering why nothing has happened. They begin believing in themselves on Monday. By Wednesday they're saying, I guess this doesn't work. By Friday they've returned to every old habit. Real change doesn't work that way. The identity you're building deserves more patience than that. You don't become a different person because you had one optimistic afternoon. You become different because you repeatedly return to the same empowering belief until it feels normal. Some days that will feel easy. Other days your old thinking will come knocking. It'll whisper, who do you think you're fooling? It'll remind you of past failures. It'll replay embarrassing memories. It'll point toward every reason your future should look exactly like your past. Don't be surprised by that. Old habits don't disappear overnight. They simply lose influence each time you refuse to hand them control. Instead of arguing with every fearful thought, notice it. Smile if you have to. Then gently redirect your attention. Tell yourself, that's the old version of me talking. That single sentence creates space between who you were and who you're becoming. And that space matters. Because once you stop identifying with every fearful thought, those thoughts stop feeling like facts. They're just echoes. Echoes fade when they aren't repeated. Here's another shift that changes everything. Stop asking, what do I need to do to become wealthy? Start asking, how would someone who already thinks abundantly approach today? Notice how different those questions feel. The first assumes you're missing something. The second assumes you're growing into someone new. That new perspective influences ordinary moments. You walk into meetings differently. You speak with more confidence. You stop apologizing for your goals. You become more willing to recognize opportunities because your attention isn't trapped by fear anymore. People often call these moments lucky, but what they're really seeing is the visible result of invisible change. The outer world eventually reflects the character you've practiced becoming. Not instantly, not mechanically, but consistently enough that, over time, your life begins to match your dominant expectations. So before you try to fix another problem outside yourself, pause. Ask yourself a simple question. What belief am I bringing into this situation? That question can save you years of unnecessary struggle, because the greatest transformation rarely begins with changing your job, your income, or your environment. It begins the moment you stop waiting for the world to convince you that you're capable and decide to become the kind of person who no longer needs that permission. That's where lasting change begins, not in the circumstances, in you. There comes a point where you have to stop asking yourself one question and start asking a completely different one. Most people ask, how do I get more money? That's the wrong question. A better question is, how would I feel if I already knew everything was working out? That one question changes the direction of your mind. See, most people spend their entire lives waiting for evidence before they allow themselves to feel secure. They tell themselves they'll relax after the raise. They'll smile after the business grows. They'll stop worrying after the debt disappears. They're always putting peace somewhere in the future. But peace isn't a reward waiting at the finish line. It's a decision you can make long before the finish line comes into view. That doesn't mean pretending your bills vanished overnight. It doesn't mean ignoring responsibilities or acting careless. It means refusing to let your current circumstances dictate your emotional state. Think about how much energy people waste checking for proof. They refresh the banking app. They check the mailbox. They refresh their email every 15 minutes. They keep asking, did anything happen yet? It's almost like digging up a seed every morning just to see if it has roots. Nothing grows under that kind of pressure. Here's something interesting. Imagine you receive a phone call from someone you trust completely. They tell you a large payment has already been approved. The paperwork is finished. The money is guaranteed. It simply takes a few days to appear in your account. What happens inside you? Does your breathing change? Do your shoulders relax? Do you stop panicking? Of course you do. Notice something important. Nothing has changed outside. The bank balance hasn't moved yet. The bills haven't disappeared. The calendar still says today, yet your emotional state has completely shifted. Why? Because certainty replaced doubt. That feeling is powerful. Now imagine creating that same certainty without waiting for the phone call. That's where real transformation begins. Your imagination is more than entertainment. It's rehearsal. Every successful athlete understands rehearsal. Every accomplished musician rehearses before stepping onto a stage. Pilots train inside simulators before flying real aircraft. Your mind works the same way. When you repeatedly imagine yourself living from financial freedom, you're teaching your nervous system what that experience feels like. At first, your mind may resist. It might say, come on, be realistic. Don't fight it. Smile, then continue anyway. Your old thinking isn't trying to protect you from failure. It's trying to protect what feels familiar, even if what's familiar isn't making you happy. That's why change sometimes feels uncomfortable. Not because it's wrong, because it's new. Here's a simple exercise. At some point during your day, close your eyes for a minute. Don't imagine stacks of cash. Don't picture fancy cars unless that's genuinely meaningful to you. Instead, imagine ordinary moments. Picture opening your banking app without anxiety. Imagine paying your monthly bills with complete ease. Picture buying groceries without silently calculating every item. Imagine helping someone you love because you genuinely can. See yourself making choices from freedom instead of fear. Those ordinary scenes often carry far more emotional power than dramatic fantasies. The goal isn't to impress yourself. The goal is to convince your heart that this life already belongs to you. The emotional quality matters more than the visual detail. Some people naturally see vivid pictures. Others don't. That's okay. You may simply feel relief. You may sense confidence. You may notice your breathing slow down. That's enough. Your mind understands feelings remarkably well. One of the best times to practice this is right before you fall asleep. Think about those final few minutes of the day. The phone is finally quiet. The conversations have ended. The responsibilities can wait until morning. Your mind becomes softer, more receptive. Instead of replaying today's worries, gently replace them with tomorrow's certainty. See yourself finishing a conversation where someone congratulates you. Imagine hearing the words, everything worked out. Picture yourself smiling because what once seemed impossible has become completely normal. Don't force it. Don't strain, let the scene become simple. Then drift off carrying that feeling. Night after night, you're giving your subconscious a consistent message. Not one of panic, not one of scarcity, but one of quiet confidence. During the day, you'll probably encounter moments that challenge your new perspective. An unexpected expense may appear. Someone may tell you the economy is terrible. A deal might take longer than expected. Don't let those moments decide your identity. Circumstances are temporary. Identity is chosen. Every time fear knocks on your door, ask yourself one question. If I already knew abundance was becoming my reality, how would I respond to this? Notice how quickly your perspective changes. Instead of reacting, you begin responding. Instead of spiraling, you remain centered. That doesn't mean you'll never feel concern. You're human. But concern no longer becomes your permanent address. You return to confidence much faster. There's another piece people often overlook. They assume opportunities must appear exactly the way they imagined. Life rarely works like that. Sometimes the solution arrives through an unexpected conversation. Sometimes it's a recommendation from a friend. Sometimes it's a new skill you decide to learn. Sometimes it's an idea that seems completely unrelated to money at first. If you're obsessed with one specific outcome, you might miss the doorway standing right beside it. Leave room to be surprised. Stay open. Your responsibility isn't to control every step. Your responsibility is to remain faithful to the identity you're choosing. Once that identity feels natural, your actions begin changing almost automatically. You speak differently. You notice possibilities you once ignored. You make decisions with greater confidence. People respond to your energy in ways that seem almost impossible to explain. From the outside, it may look like everything suddenly fell into place. But you'll know the truth. The real change happened long before anyone else could see it. It happened the moment you stopped demanding proof before believing, and started allowing belief to shape what eventually became proof. That's the shift. Not forcing, not chasing, not begging life to change. Simply becoming so familiar with the feeling of financial freedom that, little by little, your outer world begins reflecting the peace you've already established within yourself. And once that peace becomes your natural home, you'll realize something remarkable. You were never trying to manufacture abundance. You were simply making room for it to appear. One of the clearest signs that your thinking is changing isn't that your bank account suddenly doubles overnight. It's that your relationship with money begins to feel different long before the numbers change. You stop waking up with that heavy feeling sitting on your chest. You stop checking your phone every few minutes, hoping something magically improved. You stop assuming every unknown situation is going to end badly. Something inside you becomes quieter. That's when you know you're building a new identity. Most people think wealth is about having more. I think wealth begins with expecting more from life without begging life for permission. There's a huge difference. When someone constantly feels they don't have enough, they carry that feeling everywhere. They carry it into work. They carry it into conversations. They carry it into business decisions. They even carry it into moments that should bring joy. Scarcity has a way of coloring everything. A beautiful day suddenly becomes another reminder of unpaid bills. A family dinner becomes another conversation about financial stress. Even good news somehow gets overshadowed because the mind keeps returning to the same question. What if I don't have enough? That question quietly becomes the soundtrack of everyday life. Now imagine replacing it with something completely different. What if everything is already moving in my favor? Notice how your body responds. Your shoulders soften. Your breathing slows. Your thoughts stop racing quite as fast. Nothing outside has changed yet, but you have. That's the beginning. The truth is, people who consistently experience abundance usually carry themselves differently long before anyone notices their success. They don't panic over every little setback. They don't assume one bad day means their future is ruined. They don't spend hours comparing themselves with everyone else online. Instead, they develop a quiet confidence that says, I'll figure this out. That confidence isn't arrogance, it's trust. And trust creates room for wisdom. Think about how many decisions people make from fear. They accept jobs they hate because they're convinced nothing better exists. They stay silent when opportunities appear because they assume someone else is more qualified. They settle for less because they secretly believe that's all they're worth. Fear doesn't always scream. Sometimes it whispers. It says, don't even try. It says, people like you never get ahead. It says, you'll probably fail anyway. Here's the thing. You don't have to argue with those thoughts. You don't have to wrestle them to the ground. You simply stop giving them the final vote. Imagine you're sitting in a meeting. An old fearful thought walks into the room. Instead of handing it the microphone, you simply nod and let it sit quietly in the corner while confidence continues speaking. That's what mental discipline looks like. It isn't perfection. It's choosing which voice gets to lead. Some days you'll catch yourself slipping back into old habits. Maybe you see an unexpected expense. Maybe a client says no. Maybe an investment takes longer than expected. Immediately the old story tries to come back. See, nothing ever changes. Don't buy into it. Every meaningful change meets resistance. That's normal. The question isn't whether old thoughts will appear. The question is whether you'll move into them or simply observe them passing by. Think about driving across the country. You don't turn around every time you hit a traffic jam. You don't decide the destination disappeared because construction slowed you down. You keep moving. Treat your new identity the same way. Temporary delays don't cancel permanent direction. Here's something worth practicing every single day. When you walk into a room, ask yourself, how would someone who expects abundance stand? Not someone pretending to be important. Someone who genuinely feels secure. Notice your posture. Notice your breathing. Notice your pace. You don't have to rush. People operating from fear are usually in a hurry because they believe everything is about to disappear. People operating from confidence understand that opportunities continue appearing. That changes everything. Start paying attention to your language too. Instead of saying, I'm broke, pause. Ask yourself whether that's describing a moment or creating an identity. There's a difference. A temporary financial situation is not your permanent definition. The words you repeat become familiar. The familiar becomes believable. The believable eventually influences your actions. So choose your words carefully. You don't have to make outrageous claims that feel fake. You don't have to walk around saying you're a billionaire if your heart instantly rejects it. Instead, choose statements that create calm. I always find a way. Things are improving. I trust new opportunities are unfolding. Life continues opening doors. Those statements leave room for your mind to cooperate instead of argue. Another powerful habit is gratitude. Not forced gratitude. Real gratitude. Look around for evidence that life has already supported you. Maybe you've overcome challenges you once thought impossible. Maybe you've met people who helped you unexpectedly. Maybe you've received opportunities that couldn't have been planned. The more you notice support, the easier it becomes to expect support. Expectation grows through attention. Whatever you consistently acknowledge becomes more natural to believe. Now let's talk about setbacks for a minute. Everybody experiences them. The difference is what meaning you assign to them. One person loses an opportunity and decides they're unlucky. Another person loses the same opportunity and thinks, something better must be making room. Which mindset keeps moving forward? Which one notices the next opportunity? Meaning shapes momentum. Never forget that. There will also be moments when nothing seems to be happening. Those moments test your consistency. It's easy to believe when everything is going your way. The real shift happens when you continue holding your new perspective, even during ordinary days. Not because you're forcing optimism, because you're becoming someone who refuses to let temporary appearances define lasting truth. Little by little, you'll notice changes. Your conversations become lighter. People enjoy being around you more. Ideas begin arriving unexpectedly. You recognize possibilities that were always there, but invisible to your old mindset. You become more generous because fear isn't gripping every decision. You become more patient because urgency no longer controls your emotions. You become more creative because worry isn't consuming your attention. That's how identity changes. Quietly, steadily, naturally. Then one day someone notices your progress. They'll probably ask what strategy you used. They'll wonder what investment you found. They'll search for the external explanation. Very few people will recognize that the biggest investment you ever made wasn't in a stock, a business, or a piece of property. It was in the way you chose to see yourself every single day. Because once you stop identifying as someone constantly trying to survive and begin living as someone who expects life to cooperate, your actions start matching that belief. Your decisions become clearer. Your confidence becomes genuine. Your peace becomes noticeable. And before long, the outer world begins reflecting the quiet transformation that first took place when no one else could see it, inside your own mind. At some point, you have to stop chasing money and start becoming the kind of person money naturally feels at home around. That sentence may sound simple, but if you really let it sink in, it changes everything. Most people spend years believing wealth is something they have to hunt down. They think it's hiding somewhere out there, just beyond the next promotion, the next investment, the next lucky break, or the next business idea. So they keep running. They keep searching. They keep telling themselves, maybe this is the thing that'll finally change my life. Sometimes it works for a little while. Sometimes they earn more. Sometimes an opportunity shows up. Sometimes they finally catch a break. But if the person inside still believes they're one step away from losing everything, peace never stays very long. The money may arrive, but the fear stays. That's why lasting abundance has to begin somewhere deeper. It begins the moment you stop introducing yourself to life as someone who is trying to survive. Think about that. How do you mentally introduce yourself each morning? Do you silently think, I hope I can make it through today? Or do you quietly expect that life is already moving in your favor? Those few seconds after you wake up matter more than most people realize. Before you check your phone, before you read the news, before you look at your bank account, your mind is already deciding what kind of day you're about to experience. Choose wisely. You don't have to force excitement. You don't have to convince yourself that every day is perfect. Simply begin with calm expectation. Tell yourself something good is already unfolding. That's enough. Carry that feeling into ordinary moments. When you're driving to work, when you're standing in line at the grocery store, when you're answering emails, when you're making breakfast. Most people believe transformation only happens during dramatic moments. The truth is, identity is built in ordinary moments repeated consistently. That's where real change lies. You don't become someone new because of one incredible weekend. You become someone new because of hundreds of quiet decisions nobody else ever sees. One thought, one reaction, one conversation with yourself, again and again. Eventually those small moments create a completely different life. Here's something that surprises a lot of people. You don't need to feel excited every single day. Some days you'll feel tired. Some days you'll feel discouraged. Some days nothing seems to be happening. That's okay. Consistency matters far more than intensity. Think about someone learning to play the piano. Missing one note doesn't end the performance. They simply continue playing. Treat your thinking the same way. If you catch yourself slipping into fear, don't spend the rest of the day criticizing yourself. Just return. Return to confidence. Return to gratitude. Return to expectation. Every return strengthens your new direction. Another mistake people often make is believing they have to know exactly how everything will happen. Honestly, that's exhausting. Trying to control every detail creates unnecessary pressure. Life has a funny way of opening doors that never would have crossed your mind. Maybe the opportunity comes through a conversation you almost canceled. Maybe it's an introduction from someone you haven't spoken to in years. Maybe it's an idea that arrives while you're taking a walk. Maybe it's a completely unexpected path. If you're only willing to accept one specific outcome, you might miss 10 better ones standing right beside it. Stay open. Stay flexible. Trust that solutions can arrive in ways you haven't imagined yet. That doesn't mean sitting around waiting. Keep learning. Keep improving your skills. Keep showing up. Take practical action. But let those actions come from confidence instead of desperation. There's a huge difference. Desperation says, this has to work or I'm finished. Confidence says, I'm going to give this my best because opportunities continue appearing. Can you feel the difference? One creates pressure. The other creates possibility. People around you notice that energy too. You don't have to announce that you've changed. Your attitude begins speaking for you. You become easier to work with. You become more creative under pressure. You stop reacting emotionally to every setback. That calm confidence often opens doors before you even realize they're opening. Here's another habit worth developing. Celebrate progress before it's perfect. Most people postpone celebration until every goal has been achieved. Why? If you waited until graduation to enjoy learning, school would be miserable. If you waited until harvest to appreciate planting, farming would feel hopeless. Celebrate each step. Celebrate better decisions. Celebrate greater peace. Celebrate moments when you respond differently than you used to. Those small victories matter. They're evidence that your identity is changing. And identity always comes before results. Don't underestimate the power of your environment either. Pay attention to what you're feeding your mind. If every conversation is filled with fear, if every headline convinces you disaster is around the corner, if every person around you constantly complains, it becomes much harder to maintain your new perspective. You don't have to ignore reality. Just don't let negativity become your permanent teacher. Spend more time with ideas that expand possibility. Read things that strengthen hope. Listen to conversations that inspire action instead of panic. Protect your attention. It's one of your greatest assets. The longer you practice this new way of thinking, the less it feels like practice. Eventually it becomes natural. That's when something beautiful happens. You stop trying to act abundant. You simply are. You stop reminding yourself every hour. The confidence is already there. You stop needing constant reassurance because your trust has become steady. People often ask what success feels like. They expect fireworks. They expect overwhelming excitement. More often, it feels like peace. Quiet, steady peace. The kind that doesn't depend on today's circumstances. The kind that remains even when challenges appear. The kind that whispers, everything is going to be okay. That's real wealth. Because once your peace no longer depends on your bank account, your bank account loses the power to control your emotions. Ironically, that's often when your relationship with money begins changing the fastest. You're no longer pushing. You're no longer chasing. You're no longer begging life to prove something to you. You're simply living from a new expectation. One day you'll look back and realize there wasn't a single dramatic moment that changed everything. Instead, there were hundreds of ordinary moments when you chose faith over fear, calm over panic, confidence over doubt, possibility over limitation. Those moments quietly shaped a new identity. That identity shaped new decisions. Those decisions created new opportunities. Those opportunities produced new results. And eventually, the life you once imagined no longer feels like imagination at all. It feels normal. That's the true destination. Not just having more money, not just reaching another financial goal, but becoming someone who no longer measures life by fear, no longer introduces themselves to the world as someone who lacks, and no longer waits for circumstances to grant permission to feel secure. The greatest reward isn't merely the wealth you accumulate. It's the person you become while learning that abundance was never something you had to chase. It was something you learned to welcome by changing the way you saw yourself. And once that new identity feels as natural as breathing, you discover that the relief you were searching for was never hiding in a future paycheck. It was waiting in the simple decision to believe that you were never separated from abundance in the first place.